This video is about the sovereignty of the Scottish people. The people are still sovereign, not the monarch and not the Parliament. It's part of a long-running, centuries-old constitution. The purpose of this video is to highlight to people the truth of what we are now and how we got here. But it also briefly talks about why our politicians don't seem to want to understand it or know it, for whatever their reasons are. But it is the answer to our future. This royal coat of arms from the late 1500s and early 1600s is key to the story, and in a simplistic, almost cartoon fashion, shows you that the people are indeed sovereign. More on that in a second. Around the year 2012, there was an awakening of interest in regaining full control and getting independence of our country. Part of that is to make sure that we understand our sovereignty. These pictures show marches in the years around 2014-15 and later of people wanting their independence from the political union with England. Sovereignty and the people are part of the story. What you have here is the cartoon referred to in the previous page. Obviously it's not a cartoon, but it was used as a representation, pictorial, of the status of the country in this case, but it could be your family crest, it could be anything. It's a pictorial representation of how you see yourself. What you have here is the royalty, the crown of Scotland, and what you have here is the people of Scotland. If you actually look at this, you'll see that the representation, the actual character, is identical in every way, and they're looking at each other as equals. They're also tied to the land, and this represents the kinship of the people going past between the crown, between the people and the land as one. The crown in the middle here represents the nation, so the people and the crown are in the nation. So that's why you sometimes hear the phrase, the people in the crown, the sovereignty of the people in the crown. This is where it comes from. For information only, many crests, particularly this one, has the word in defence on top. The word defence is Scots for the word defence, and this is the same phrase exactly in Scottish Gaelic. In 1603, there was a thing called the Union of the Crowns, but it was no such thing. It was actually a myth generated by London. It can't be a union of the crowns. It was one monarch, two kingdoms. So you had the King of Scotland and the same physical person sitting as the King or Queen of England. And the constitutions were both different, and the oath to the people or the country was both different. If you actually look at what's in front of that diagram there, this cartoon, you'll see that in the case of Scotland here, it's identical to this. Both looking equal at each other as equals. If you look at the representation of the English crown here, he's not looking across as equals, he's looking aggressively at you. He's not anchored to the land because he is above that. And here you see the representation of Scotland, and Scotland here as being the same monarch. France, although it was 1603, they still thought they owned the lands of William the Conqueror. And here you have Ireland. But the Scottish Constitution says that the people are sovereign. There's no such thing as the supremacy of Parliament. So the people are sovereign, not the Crown and not the Parliament. And this is the subject I'm now going to talk about, the purpose of this whole video. In England, as shown here. The monarch and the Parliament are sovereign. They're above it all, they're above the land. And in England, all the people are subjects. Historically, they were almost like slaves and serfs to the will of the king. And this union at Westminster between Parliament and the monarch is often used to distort law and tell lies today. In the 1990s, Kenyon Wright chaired a constitutional convention in Scotland, which eventually led in 1999 to the current Scottish Parliament. But when he was talking, he asked this question of himself: what happens if this other place, that's Westminster, responds to what we want by saying no and we are the state? He answered his own question by saying, well, we say yes and we are the people. The people are sovereign. This is the purpose of this talk. Over the next few slides, I'm going to show you how practice and law changed over time in Scotland that gave us our popular sovereignty, so you have a better understanding of it, and I'll bring you right up to date. Like all countries, the history of Scotland is long. If you go back in Scotland, you had a group of people called the Picts. The Romans gave them that name when they were up here. And the Picts spoke a Brittonic Gaelic, which is the forerunner of what the Gaelics are of today. And then around the year 200, a tribe from Northern Ireland called the Scotti came into the areas you see here, and they spoke nearly the same Gaelic, but a different one. And then the Britons came. When the Roman legions left at 410, to protect the area of what is now England, they asked the Jutes, the Saxons and the Angles to come in and keep these pesky Scots and Picts in check from raiding the coast of their countries. And as these peoples moved into England and moved and immigrated in, they were a bunch of immigrants, and they actually took over England in time. And the people that didn't want to change moved to Wales, Cornwall, Brittany in France, and here in Scotland. And the Empire of the Britons had their castle at Dunad in Dumbartonshire, and they managed an area here, basically the lands around the Clyde. And history books show Angles here, but the Angles really came in first of all to Kent, Suffolk, Norfolk, in that area there, and it was the Jutes that came in to Northumbria. So it was probably the Jutes that came here first, and these different peoples spoke a language with a German root. And then as time went on to the year 800, you had a totally different language group, Norse, come in with the Vikings. But the predominant language for long and in the structures of Scotland was Gaelic. The Gaelic structures are horizontal, not vertical, and it was all about kinship of the land, tied to the land, and supporting each other. And you could change leaderships, and you could actually manage things and work together. It was kinship, not just in family, but in tribe. And this feeling of mutual support and respect changed over 700 years and was known as the Dúthchas. More on that in a second. This structure changed to a vertical structure when King David I of Scotland introduced feudalism. He was copying the system in England and Wales that was brought to these islands by William the Conqueror in 1066. But unlike England and Wales, although he talked about the Brets, which is the Britons, and the Scots, he did continue in practice and in legal law the rights, obligations and kinship that was developed here. I'll read this because it's very important. Over the hundreds of years of the development of Scotland from the year 845, when the country was founded, the Dúthchas states that power is in the community of the nation, in the people, and is only delegated or loaned to the monarch or government, and it exists in service to the common good of all the people, and may be revoked by the will of the community. What that's saying is the people look after each other. That is in our law. They actually can get rid of the Parliament and get rid of the King if they want. This popular doctrine of sovereignty and primacy of the common good has been explicitly expressed in law for over 700 years of Scotland's history. By 1286, there was a formal set-up of something called the Guardian of the Realms, and this was the start in legal terms of popular sovereignty, although it existed for centuries before through the different Celtic structures. It was a body of the community, people, boroughs, people that ran the local community and represented them. It was not linked to the Parliament of the country at all, and it wasn't linked to the Crown, and in time it morphed into the General Council. This was in the late 1300s, and it became in the late 1400s known as the Convention of the Estates. This body actually, in 4 occasions in Scotland's history prior to 1707, ran the country when the monarch was simply too young to govern, or there was a gap in the power structure caused by war. In 1552, this convention actually was meeting regularly in a separate assembly, and their job was to decide a common policy for the adoption by the people of Parliament. They were guiding Parliament, although no doubt Parliament had its own inputs. Popular and sovereignty well settled into Scotland now. King Robert the Bruce became King of Scots in 1306, but he didn't sign in and do his oath until 1310. That's the oath to the Scottish people. It's a long paragraph, this, so I've taken the first and last sentences to get the message across, and this was said by the clergy to a meeting of the people and a meeting of the Crown. The people, the Commons of the Kingdom of Scotland, and by their authority, this is the people's authority, over the land, solemnly made Robert the Bruce King of Scots. In 1319, there was a thing in Aberdeen called the Charter of the Stocket. This was when, in 1319, King Robert the Bruce donated a forest on his land, and it was the forest called Stocket. And the town could then use that land, use the timber, to do what it wanted, and it used it to create a common good fund. And this spread through the whole of Scotland. And today, every borough and every area has its common good fund to help people. In the case of the past, the Aberdeen started by building universities and colleges, bridges. It helped people, famine and so on. It helped the downtrodden. As time went on, things became more written and more legal. I want to highlight the last one here, the Rebellion Act, which formally in writing gave the Convention of the Estates the power to have a go at a monarch and, if need be, remove them. But this is not a new thing. What actually happened here in 1320 in the Declaration of Arbroath, it was clearly stated that the monarch is servant to the people, and the people can, if unhappy, remove the monarch. This simply made it legal in written law. Salvo is not a line of field guns fired out, but Salvo started when the Scottish Parliament allowed people in the conventions of the states and the boroughs and the commoners to actually be there after the Parliament meetings, and those meetings were called Salvo, and it allowed the people face to face with their represented people to actually have a go, to tell them they're not happy with this. But by 1663, this function that had been going on since 1592 became written law. And this is what it means in Latin, but it means salvo. So from 1592 until the Scottish Parliament ended, it acknowledged the sovereignty of the people. And it was done with the power to remove, the power to consult, the power to tell the Parliament what to do. The Union Act of 1707 includes this act. It includes an act called the Claim of Right, which I'm going to mention now. And these words and these rules allowed the people of Scotland to escape and the right to contract out if they felt they had been wronged. And that means the Treaty of Union. If you go into the House of Commons Library at London or go into Google and search the words Claim of Right, this is actually what you get. So there's the symbol of the crowns. You can see there's two. I mentioned this earlier. It's a declaration of the estates of the Kingdom of Scotland, the people, within the Claim of Right. It was an offer of the crown to the King William to be the King of Scotland, based on what happened in 1603. It wasn't an offer to the King and Queen of England. They were already the King of Queen and Queen of England. They just weren't the King and Queen of Scotland. And this was to actually offer them the crown of Scotland in 1689. Its current legislation, indeed, without the Treaty of Union and without the Claim of Right, which is embedded within this treaty, the political union between Scotland and England legally ceases to exist. In the United Nations, Scotland and England are recorded as two separate sovereign states. It's just that we went political in 1707, but we didn't concede territory or any such thing. All that will be part of future videos. This is a very poor copy of the actual declaration of the Claim of Right to offer the crown of Scotland to William and Mary, and also making sure that he obeyed the laws and rules of Scotland. Every now and again, the Westminster government confirms the principles of the Claim of Right for Scotland. And this is the key part that best suits their needs. The sad story is they've been trying for over 200 years or more to stop this, but it still is mentioned and it is still legal and it's live law today. It's not just some ancient law from the distant past. It is integral to the rights of the people of Scotland and in fact the Union of the United Kingdom, or to be more accurate, in the treaty, Great Britain. What actually happened also within the Claim of Right, its purpose was to sort out a few problems. One was that the king of both kingdoms, two constitutions, one king, two kingdoms, 7th of Scotland, 2nd of England, they weren't happy with him that he was looking after Scotland and he never came here. And he was moving towards what some believed the Catholic faith. As Scotland was strongly Presbyterian, they decided to get rid of him for these reasons. But because when you get rid of the king was in Parliament. If you get rid of the king, you get rid of the Parliament. So what actually happened is the Convention of the States, like it had done in the past, ran the country from 1689. The law actually puts certain legal rights for the people and limits the power of any future monarchy. The religious people at the time, which eventually the clergy eventually dropped out the Convention of the Estates, I'll mention soon, but it was to make sure that the religious laws and liberties already in Scotland were constitutionally based and couldn't be taken away. The interesting thing in all this, they were protecting the Scottish pastoral considerations. When King Charles swore himself as King of England, he was in charge of the Church of England and his duties to do responsibility for the Church of England. In Scotland, he wasn't our king. I know that's a myth, and we're told he is, but he has never sworn to be King of Scots. He's never taken the oath of the Kings of Scotland. So therefore, he has no control over the pastoral consideration or will of the people. What the claim of right establishes is several things. It's about the continued authority of the community of the realm, the body that in effect the people is sovereign. It transfers the sovereignty of the people to any elected body it chooses, but the control is with the people. This long sentence here basically says, in very simple terms, the people are in charge, and anyone else who's involved in the running of the country is subservient to the people. So the claim of right, it does this. It creates a fundamental constitution in Scotland by which power of government is limited. The final authority of government under the claim of right is the people of the nation to grant or remove power of the government. It protects under the Constitution all civil rights and liberties built up over centuries and written and encoded. It also stops any government or any monarch from changing this act. And they cannot rescind it, and they cannot claim absolute sovereignty over the laws and rights of the people, because if they do, they forfeit everything. This is how powerful the claim of right is to the Scottish people. In 1699, King William was a bit upset, and he decided he wanted to break the contract with the Scottish people and alter the claim of right and so on. Unlike now, at that time, the Privy Council down in London, that made up of MPs down there, said to the King, you can't do this, and you can't do this because you swore an oath to the Scottish people that is upheld in the claim of right. So the people then totally understood well how the Constitution and the make-up of the Great British Parliament was. It wasn't until later that real pressure was put on to destroy Scotland as an image within its people. One of the final acts was, once again, the Convention of the States was attacked by William, this thing here. And he said, one of the things he said is, you're not a parliament, so what rights do you have? Of course, they had the rights of the people within the written constitution of Scotland, going back centuries. But what they did was they retrofitted and called themselves a parliament from 1689. So they actually made themselves a parliament. But they changed it from forfeiture if you tried to change the claim of right to high treason. Of course, high treason in those days meant death. In 1953, there was a legal case between the Lord Advocate of Scotland and a person McCormick. And this is a summary of the case at the end by Lord Cooper, who was in the Court of Session. The Court of Session is the highest court in Scotland. I'm not going to let you have time to read this, but come back with the video slider if you're interested. I'm just going to show you and explain. What he basically said is the principle which is in English constitutional law, the Bill of Rights, and the royalty and the monarch of unlimited sovereignty of Parliament is a uniquely English principle, and it has no counterpart in Scottish constitutional law. This is because the Parliament isn't sovereign, the people are sovereign. And he explains about how the two parliaments came together and how things were done and things should have been done. But he said this wasn't done. Basically what he's saying here is that the powers and so on within the English Parliament were slowly pushed over these islands, including Scotland. There's reasons why this happened and it allowed to happen, but it's beyond the talk of this presentation. But he said there's no union legislation or any provision in the Parliament of Great Britain in Westminster about absolute sovereignty in the sense that the Parliament is sovereign in Scotland, and the Parliament in England cannot alter the treaty at will. This is what this was all about. England has the thing called the Magna Carta, which is the start of its constitution. And it was through that eventually the time moved on, they became and had an English Bill of Rights. And you can read this again later with the video slider. But basically what he's saying is that Scotland's Magna Carta, its constitution, is fundamentally the claim of right. And the claim of right, unlike the Bill of Rights, it actually says that the constitutional principles of the monarchy is bound by law. They can't do what they want. And the claim of right enunciates the basic principles of due process. And it is in the danger of being forgotten today. This is a deliberate policy that's been going on for a long time. But at the root of it at Westminster, they will not change or decry the rights of Scotland. It's just sad that as time's gone on, people have forgotten. Carwyn Jones was the First Minister of Wales, and over the last 10 years or more he's been doing lots of talks on various topics with regards to the constitution in these islands. This particular talk was about some of the laws that were coming through to do with Brexit. You've heard things of Henry VIII laws. How could they apply when the Parliament that we're talking about here only came into existence in 1707, long after Henry VIII was dead? So what he says is, in 1689, Earl of Shaftesbury got all excited because they just passed the English Bill of Rights, and he said that the English Parliament was sovereign. But the English Parliament nor the Scottish Parliament exists anymore. They both disappeared in 1707, and a new Parliament at that time called the Parliament of Great Britain came into existence. And within the laws since 1707, there is no sovereignty of Parliament written or stated anywhere. And it's important because Scotland has no concept of parliamentary sovereignty, and it never has in its history. He says that the sovereignty in Scotland still rests with the people. He says there were lots of legal cases that came out in the 50s and 60s, in fact early 70s, which are referred to two of them here prior to this slide. But what does that actually mean? It means if you try to change the law and impose something that puts a different sovereignty on Scotland, then you're breaking the Treaty of Union. And if you break the Treaty of Union, legally the union between Scotland and England ceases to exist, and you revert back to two sovereign states. So he says he'll leave the Scots to fight his own battle with regards to this Brexit legislation, but he clearly states that parliamentary sovereignty has never ever been part of the Great Britain United Kingdom Parliament. Although they're trying to do it now, they're trying to impose it now. So where did we lose the rights in Scotland? Well, there was unrest either side of the treaty which was signed in 1707 between the two countries. But the main problem then really began in 1744 when a person called Charles Edward Stuart, known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, decided due to his heritage that the crown of England was his, and he got the Highlands to back him, and they went down to England as far as Derby, gave up, came back and got defeated in 1745. But what happened then is, after a couple of years of extreme retribution against the Highlanders, was that we had military law in Scotland between 1745 and 1810. They built over 420 stone structures for defence and another 230 commandeered properties like houses and barns and so on to keep control of Scotland. But the military law basically ran the country, and they subverted any control that was there. So there was no mechanism for the people in Scotland to actually keep their constitution and manage themselves, although they still ran things like education, the courts and so on. But at the legal level there was nothing. Until 1999, when the Scottish Parliament was created. And this Parliament, which has partial powers in Scotland, is 100% totally controlled by the UK Parliament's finance. Power given is power retained. Nevertheless, the MPs in the Parliament of Scotland, when they get sworn in, the MSPs, they swear allegiance to the people, whereas at Westminster the Scottish MPs swear allegiance to King Charles. But the thing is, they only follow their allegiance to the people on the day we vote for them, and then after that they ignore us. And it's my belief that the majority of our representatives, be they at Westminster or Holyrood, actually have no real knowledge of the rights and strength of the Scottish Constitution. For instance, circumstances in 2015 and 2016 would have allowed our representatives in Westminster to actually use the claim of right and actually break the Union and create independence for Scotland. And this was by a party that proposed that they were the ones for independence, but they did nothing. Basically, there was no convention of the states in Scotland or any mechanism whereby the people of Scotland could keep control of their legal rights. So as time went on, Westminster exerted its authority and tried to superimpose different laws on us. So during the time from 1707 for the 300 and nearly 20 years since then, the people of Scotland have lost sight of their past. It's not taught in our education system in Scotland or in fact in England. So the majority of the people don't know. Peter Bell, a member of the group that is working to retain and get back Scottish sovereignty, wrote this and said this, and think about his words. Suppose the people of a nation were kept in ignorance of their constitutional rights and recourses. Suppose that they were, that's Scotland, by various means both subtle, crude, uneducated and deceived, regarding their history, traditions and culture. What would become of these people? They would be assimilated. Who would wish to create such a situation? Westminster. Who would benefit from the people of a nation being kept in ignorance of their entitlements under a constitution whose very existence, this is the Scottish constitution, has been kept from the people? It's very real that the status of Scotland is foreign to most people in Scotland, and it comes as disbelief to many. And it's foreign to them because they've lived so long in the indoctrination and the myth of the Union. The real Scotland is in large part of the nations a foreign place they're unaware of. But the key thing now is, as you've seen this presentation, the Scottish people have power, they have sovereign territory. So the question Peter asked is what happens when they find out? As part of the drive to reinstall Scotland as a separate sovereign state and get our independence, a group has been working away and they set up the Stirling Directive. And the Stirling Directive basically converts the claim of right into modern English. And they actually sent it out to different groups in 2023 and 22, and this is part of the rights. So once again, please come back with the slider, take your time and see this, but fundamentally what it does, it actually confirms the sovereignty of Scotland's people in the directive, and it upholds the constitutional elements of the union with England. It requires political recognition by the people that run the country of the Scottish Constitution, and it will pursue to get self-determination back under international law. That's what this group sets out. Please read this when you have a moment with the video slider. Please read this. You can get the full text if you type in that link. So with regards to the use of the Scottish Constitution by our elected representatives to support the people and move things on, in the near term I see no chance of this happening, because the people in the Scottish Parliament and the people in Westminster as a whole, maybe not individually, but as a whole, show no enthusiasm to use the law of Scotland. I'm sure most of them don't know it. And here's an example. On the 8th of February this year, Stephen Flynn, who was the leader of the SNP party, the Party for Independence, at Westminster, in a video interview said this: "It is self-evident that in these Isles that the Westminster Parliament is supreme. With regard to the Lord of Scotland, he has just proven he's a really ignorant man. Perhaps he was doing it because this year, 24, there's a general election and he was thinking about the votes for the SNP party at that election. Who knows? We'll have to get independence first, before we can actually get the powers that we have within our constitution. And the nearest example in the world for how you actually get popular sovereignty is Switzerland. They have 26 different areas called cantons, and within each area of those cantons they have an elected parliament where the people in those cantons have control of what that local representative and council does. Likewise, at a federal level, they do the same, and they can do things by referenda, and if they get a certain level of votes within the referenda, then the House, whether it's federal or local, has to obey the people. But there is balance, because for long-term things, the Parliament, say the federal Parliament, has the right to come back and say, but you've got to think of this, because this is a long-term thing. Say it could be to do with power generation, it could be to do with military defence, who knows, but there is balance, and that is the future. This is a summary of my talk. Hopefully I've shown you that over the centuries, from the Celtic origins of our different peoples that came together eventually to form a country called Alaba, which moved to be called Scotland, that we had the kinship at the horizontal control structures of the people that lived on the land, and they actually had a kinship that helped each other. Over the centuries, especially from the 1200s onwards, this slowly became the Convention of the Estates. In later, it had different names, and these changes actually allowed us to control the rights of the monarch and depose the monarch and depose the Parliament. It allowed us to look after ourselves. It created a common good fund for the wealth of the communities, building bridges, schools, thought about looking after people with famine and problems. These are part of Scotland's heritage and they're in our laws. But the main change that happened laterally was the claim of right. The claim of right was pushed through by the Convention of the Estates that recognised that the monarch at the time wasn't playing ball, so they got rid of him. That's the power of the people. And because they got rid of him, they actually had to get rid of the Parliament, because the Crown and the Parliament are together. What happened then is the Convention of the States ran the country, as they had done 3 or 4 times before when there was a reason historically to do so. And the power built up until we lost our independence and went to the political union with England. But it gave us lots of power. And the thing you have to understand, and I've mentioned it before, is that the claim of right and the provisions of the treaty give us power. It gives us power now that our politicians and our leaders can use to ensure that we're looked after and ensure that we're not kept under the control of policies that don't relate to the psyche of Scotland. Our politicians don't actually recognise this. They swear allegiance to us when they get sworn in, when they've been voted in, and they have allegiance to us on the day they vote for them. Then it ends. There's been cases and instances since 2014, notably 15 and 16, where had our politicians actually understood the claim of right and actually used it, we could have had our independence by now. That's the past. The actual group that I'm going to tell you about in a minute and mentioned earlier started working to actually spread the word and educate the people. They're doing other things as well, but that's one of their briefs, and that's where the idea for me for this video came from. But be proud of your country. Spread the word and ask yourself this. When I was at school, and when I talk to my friends now, how come the history of Scotland, not just our rights here with the sovereignty, which hopefully you understand more now, but everything, how come we don't know? You might have been given the dates for the Battle of Bannockburn and King Robert the Bruce, and that's basically it. But did you know that this flag here was first known in written records for a battle in 1018, where now on the Berwickshire on the border with Northumberland at a place called Careham. And at that time, an army of Picts and Britons, known as the Brets, actually fought a Northumbrian army. We lost at a place called Careham, but that was the first recorded use of our flag, and it's been our proud flag since. So be proud of it, spread the word for our history. Who is a sovereign Scot? It's not about where you're born to be a person in a country. What a sovereign person is for a country is someone who may share the ethnicity but may not, but it's about cultural, linguistic, traditional and social and constitutional expressions of that identity. And when you think about the sovereignty of Scottish people and the things I've told you today, those expressions have been suppressed. People don't know what their rights and identities are. Even our language has been suppressed deliberately since the end of the 1800s. So share news willingly, spread the word so that the people in Scotland can actually share our identity, learn our identity, not lose sight of the past, because if you lose the past and you lose your history, you lose your nation and you lose yourself. Today, the Claim of Right Convention of the Estates would be called simply the Assembly of the Communities all of the communities of Scotland. We're all Scots, if you believe in Scotland. If you support a different foreign power that's running your country, you may call yourself Scottish, and you may be, but the truth of it is you support the power of a foreign country that has actually suppressed our language, suppressed our laws, suppressed our freedoms to be sovereign of the people. So learn, spread the word. This is my last slide. If you want more information about what's happening with regards to the Scottish Constitution and Scottish history, use the internet and you can find lots of good things, or go to a good library. But be careful and consider the position of the person that wrote that story. People have been in the country for so long, and the myth has been there for so long, that the person who's writing whatever you're reading may have a different view and objective to you, and they may not be telling you the truth, but they themselves may believe the myth. But always be wary of what you read. If you want to know more about everything I've said here in much more detail, then go into the website salvo.scot. Salvo comes from the power of the Scottish people from 1592 onwards to control and manage their parliament. Go in there and have a look, ask questions. If you want to hear about history from an aspect that you've never heard before, in school or in the media or anywhere in fact, read Doonhaddon by Professor Alfred Baird. It was published in 2020. Doonhaddon means held down in Scots, in other words, oppressed. So before I go, this is the first of what will be 5 videos which will be coming out in the next year or so. And this is what these 5 videos are. It's actually to clarify Scottish history that isn't taught in school and is hidden, but it's truth. I hope you find them and enjoy them in time. Thanks very much for listening to this particular video. Goodbye.